What's up, everybody? Wes Goldberg here, RealGM Radio. Jared Dubin is joining me today to talk about some recent offseason moves, including the Thunder locking up their big three, Nikola Jokic delaying extension talks until next summer, and the Norm Powell-John Collins trade. We'll also talk about which teams had the worst offseasons. Then we're going to revisit the decision 15 years later and how it changed the NBA before looking at what comes next for LeBron. Let's jump in. All right, RealGM Radio. I'm here with Jared Dubin. Before we jump in, just a reminder, hit that subscribe button. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you're following us on your podcast app to get the show every week. Jared Dubin is here. You know him from CBS Sports, the Last Night in Basketball newsletter, and the Double Dribble podcast that he does with Mo Dakhil. A great listen there. But let's just jump right in because we got a bunch of stuff to get to here, Jared. I want to review some of the recent news from the offseason. So we're going to hit a bunch of those topics here today. And I want to start with the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have agreed with Chet Holmgren on a 5-year, $250 million extension. SGA already agreed on his massive Supermax extension a week ago. Next is Jalen Williams, and the word out of OKC is that they feel pretty comfortable that they're going to get a deal done there. He's eligible for a 5-year, $246 million extension, so pretty much the same thing as Chet Holmgren. And if they get everything done here, that would get everybody signed, those three guys signed through the 2030-2031 season for a combined cost of about $165 to $175 million per season. When you start getting into those extension amounts, this team is going to get very expensive starting next season. But my question is whether you think SGA, Chet, and Jalen Williams are good enough to tie up basically most of your cap space for the foreseeable future.
So first, yes, I think they're absolutely good enough to tie up most of your cap space. Not necessarily in large part, but at least in part because the Thunder obviously have 7 million draft picks with which they can replenish the coffers basically whenever they want to. And the other thing is they're not going to have to worry that much about the aprons because by the time these guys are costing $150, $160 million, the aprons are going to be in like the high 200s million dollars, and you still got like 100 million plus to fill out the rest of your roster. It's just not that big a deal. The only question is, will Clay Bennett pay the luxury tax? And that's on him. Like, that's just pay it. You're going to have the best team in the league for the next 6 or 7 years, as long as you're willing to pay for it. And it's fully justifiable. They have plenty, like I said, in the coffers to figure out how to fill out the end of the rotation. Like once guys like Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein cycle out, like they signed Jalen Williams, they signed AJ Mitchell for the next 3-4 years each. So those guys will be ready to take on bigger roles. They still have Cason Wallace, Aaron Wiggins, and Isaiah Joe under long-term deals. They could move those guys if they want to, and they can miss on like a third to half of their draft picks. And still, as long as they hit on some of them, they'll be able to replenish the rotation players. Like, this shouldn't be that much of an issue for them as long as they're actually willing to pay for the team, which they obviously should be.
They just got Thomas Sorber in the middle of this first round. I love that fit for Oklahoma City. It might be one of my favorite picks in the draft just because he feels like a guy that could be ready day one. Doesn't have to be, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, when Hartenstein, to your point, cycles out here a little bit, Sorber should be ready to take on those backup center roles. But they have team options on Hartenstein and Lou Dort next summer. If they were to just hypothetically exercise those options and let those guys go, that saves them about $46 million. That basically pays for one of Chet or Jalen Williams, right? Like just right there. And those guys are luxuries, right? You've got Cason Wallace coming up. You've got Thomas Sorber, who you just drafted. You've got Chet Holmgren, who could just play the 5 full time and you go a little bit smaller, or you play Sorber with Chet, or you still play the other Jalen Williams with Chet, or however you want to do it. You could do it if you're OKC, or you could use these draft picks and these other things to potentially swap out some contracts and go get another guy who's a little bit cheaper if they wanted to do that. They just have a million different ways to fortify the roster. Now, that said, the roster might not ever be as good as it was this last season when they won the championship and this coming season, right? It's just, they're absolutely stacked. All these guys are pretty cheap right now. But that's like, they were so freaking good that they could still remain very, very competitive. And I know a lot of people keep talking about, like, is this a dynasty or whatever? But, you know, whatever it is, they have the potential for a very long run of success here, even if the roster isn't as flush with awesome play. Because right now you look at the roster, it's like, wow, there's like 14 guys who can legitimately play. They might not ever be that deep again, but they don't have to be.
Yeah, I would say that even if they lose like 5 or 6 rotation guys from the team that they have now, as long as they have those 3 guys there,
Yep.
they can still be really, really good. And like they could be the number 1 seed still if they lose, Hartenstein and Caruso and I don't know, 2 or 3 other guys. Like I would be, for what it's worth, pretty surprised if they just let Dort and Hartenstein walk for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's more likely that they either decline those team options and sign them for longer contracts but less money, or that they pick them up and trade them. I think the least likely result is they decline the option and let those guys sign somewhere else in free agency. That just does not seem like the kind of asset management that Sam Presti uses, as obviously we've seen over the years. And even Sorber, like I like him a little bit too. I admittedly don't know that much about the draft guys this year, but from what I know, he seems very interesting. He's gonna be the 4th center this year. You got plenty of time to bring him along, and they still got Nikola Jokic coming back this year from the 20 ACL.
Yep.
Missed the entire season. Like as much as you could say that their team had issues this year, one of them was like off the dribble creation in the half court, other than Shea and at times J Dub, who we found out was playing with this crazy wrist injury that didn't
Right.
obviously to be himself. And adding another creator like that to the mix is just insane. Yeah, I mean, yes, they can, and yes, they should. It's all a matter of Clay Bennett being willing to pay for the team in the luxury tax, because they don't even necessarily have to go over the second apron, and they can do it if they need to in a season or two. But it's not like they're going to have to be over it every year for 4 or 5 years and dealing with, like the repeater tax will be there as long as they're over the tax. But again, just pay it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like they're going to have their draft picks frozen and all those restrictions and whatnot. And if there's any team that's set up to have their draft picks frozen and not care, it's
Right.
these guys.
That's true. They're like, freeze our draft picks. We don't care. We have 1 million draft picks in every draft. It doesn't matter to us. And Clay Bennett, to your point, like, everybody keeps talking. When you think about will the Thunder pay for an expensive roster, most people's minds go back all the way to James Harden, right? And how they weren't willing to pay it. But since then, like, they've paid the tax, right? They paid the tax during the Paul George, Russell Westbrook years. I think maybe 1 or 2 years. I think I have that right. But they're willing. I would imagine they'd be willing to pay a team that won the championship.
I would hope so. It's also just a much different financial environment now than it was then. You're talking about like 200 something million dollars when you're talking about the second aprons and whatnot. Whereas back in the day, you're talking about like $70 million cap and the taxes in like the 80s or 90s. And like, if you're paying 3 guys $20 million a year, it's extremely difficult to not deal with those penalties. It's a lot different these days than it was then. And teams are making more money than they were then. And I think more owners, at least, not all of them and not enough of them, are clued into the fact that the real money for them is in the valuation, and continuing to win at the highest level only raises the valuation of the team.
Yep. You mentioned the Jalen Williams injury there. Obviously, he comes out with whatever that 15-minute YouTube video where he's just sitting down explaining it. As somebody who covers the sport, what did you think about that? I loved it. You usually hear stuff, especially when these teams lose. Oh, so and so is dealing with a knee thing or a broken, fractured thumb here or whatever, and it kind of feels like it's excuse making. And obviously, it's not excuse making because the Thunder won the championship. It didn't matter, but I like that it doesn't just come out in like, oh, leak it so that everybody knows that I had like a fractured thumb. It's like Jalen Williams sat down, looked like in his kitchen somewhere, and just told a story, which I found riveting. I thought that was really cool. He talked about like all the behind the scenes stuff. What do we have to do to get done? That's how you do it to me. That was really cool.
I think that's really cool too. I will say, if they had lost Game 7 and he did the exact same thing, people would be like, oh, this is just excuse making. Basically, anytime a player has an injury that gets announced after the playoffs, usually after their team loses, because only one team wins, everybody just calls it an excuse when really it's an explanation, or it's just reality. Guys get injured. We know they deal with significant injuries throughout the season, and especially during the playoffs, because nobody wants to sit out playoff games if they don't absolutely have to. And it is what it is. People call it an excuse, but I think that's kind of stupid.
Yep. Other extension news here. So an extension that wasn't signed. Nikola Jokic telling the Nuggets or informing the Nuggets one way or the other that he's not going to sign an extension this summer, that he's going to wait instead until next summer when he could potentially sign a 4-year extension that would be worth an additional $77 million, I think it is, in guaranteed money. Do you think that this was just a simple money move for Jokic, or do you think there's more to it here?
I think it's probably just a money move and also a 4-year extension, knowing what he's talked about and what people have said about him throughout his career. That could just be the last contract that he signs. Granted, he seems like the kind of guy who could play until he's 50 if he wants to, just because of the way he plays and how his skill set lends itself to not having any athleticism left at whatever point that comes. But he also doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to be like, I'm playing till I'm 50. So I wouldn't be surprised if, that contract extension would take him through 2031 or 32, I think. And that would be his age, 35, 36, 37 season. I can't remember off the top of my head. It wouldn't be surprising to me if that was just like, all right, that's the last contract that he signs.
Definitely could be, right? So he is 30 years old now. Tack on that 4-year extension. Yeah, 35, 36, something like that.
Because this is covering the current contract he's on is covering his age 31 and 32 seasons. You add 4 years onto that, it'll get him to 36. I know guys are playing a lot deeper into their careers than that these days, but it's also an exception to the rule. Like LeBron and Durant and Steph and Chris Paul have sort of warped our brains in regards to what's normal. Like I remember when Melo was 35 years old and people would be like, oh my God, like why has nobody signed Melo? And it's like, because he's not that good anymore. And that's fine. Like that's how it's supposed to be. These other guys that are playing deep into their 30s and even into their 40s, like LeBron, are aliens. And it makes no sense that they're still in the league, let alone really good.
Yeah, it blows my mind watching like Carmelo Anthony do what Carmelo Anthony is doing, or like Dwayne Wade get his statue. These guys were in the same draft class as LeBron, and LeBron's still one of the best 10 players in the league. It's just like, like, what is going on? This is crazy.
And like what is going on with Carmelo and Wade right now, where they're, getting statues, getting into the Hall of Fame, taking jobs on TV, owning parts of teams. That's what it's supposed to be. Like these guys are supposed to be retired by their mid-30s traditionally. Like it's great that we've got guys that can play longer than that now and still be, among the best players in the league. But for the most part, that does not happen.
I agree. I think it's just the money move. I think it's, hey, you know what? Jokic knows he could tear, God forbid, knock on wood, whatever. He could tear his Achilles in the first minute of the first game of the next season, and the Nuggets would still offer him that extension next summer, right? It's just, you got to do it. And he probably knows that. So, hey, you know what? Let me just get the extra $77 million of guaranteed money. I don't need to worry about it right now. That's probably what it is. I will say this, though. I like the idea, whether this is true or not, of Jokic maybe subtly applying a little bit of pressure, because we saw what Kroenke said in the press conference. I hope he signs an extension, maybe not, whatever. It's just like, but if Jokic is applying a little bit of pressure on Denver, be like, hey, look, I like the Valanciunas thing, the Tim Hardaway Jr. I love having Bruce Brown back here. The Cam Johnson trade helped us do a lot of things. I like what we're doing, but let's wait and see. Let's make sure this stuff works. Just keeping the franchise on their toes a little bit could be useful for Jokic, who I thought was as visibly frustrated as I've seen him towards the end of last season, since they basically have been a championship contender, right? And so, this is a guy who a lot of people, he just wants to ride horses and drink beer, and that's all he cares about. This guy is a ape shit competitor guy. Like he wants to win at the highest level. And so if this even just, maybe it's not the first reason why, maybe again, it's probably just the money, the guaranteed money. That's the first reason why he doesn't want the extension right now. But if there's like a side reason here where it's like, you know what? Doesn't hurt that I keep them on their toes a little bit. I'm here for it because I think that helps.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Like when you have a year or 2 years left on your contract, you can exert some leverage and be like, hey, we should keep making more moves to try to make this team better rather than just resting on our laurels and letting the supporting cast atrophy over the course of several years.
Speaking of leverage, Jonas Valanciunas, it was reported earlier this morning, I think it was, that it does sound like he's going to stay in the NBA, stay with the Denver Nuggets. There was this whole thing about, was Valanciunas going to actually leave and try to decline that $10 million contract and go play in Greece somewhere, where he also had a pretty big offer to go play there. But it sounds like, again, the Nuggets are hopeful that they're going to bring him back. Vic Lombardi reported that that they are likely to guarantee Valanciunas' second season, which had been a team option. So my new favorite conspiracy theory is that he was never going to play in Greece, and this is just a ploy to get them to guarantee that second year instead of it being a team option.
It's not a bad conspiracy theory. I don't know if I 100% believe it,
Right.
but it is definitely like it's believable. I just don't know if I 100% believe it to be true.
Right.
But I mean, either way, massive win for the Nuggets to keep him in the NBA. Like it was going to be the first time ever that they haven't had a total black hole at backup center. And they obviously desperately need that to be able to not, die when Jokic goes off the court.
Mm-hmm.
And, are there problems with Valanciunas? Is he better limited to, 14, 18 minutes a game or whatever it is that he's going to get now? Yeah. But he's a good backup center. He's going to kill people in the post when he's on the court as the backup. He is more of a shooter now than he was earlier in his career. He's not like great, but he'll hit, the occasional three every couple games or so, which is nice for them. It's huge that he's going to stick around.
Him and Steven Adams are like the all NBA don't want to see them in a dark alley team. Like that guy's just like a human dumbbell. And I love having him on that Nuggets
James
roster.
Johnson is the number one. He's in like a different league. The other guys are like, everybody
captain.
will tell you James Johnson is the scariest guy in the league, which makes sense because of his history and mixed martial arts and whatnot. Like he could kill you if he wanted to, probably.
He could do that thing with like the one finger and you're like, why am I dead now? What just happened?
Yeah.
But I love adding Valanciunas. He's, Denver can sometimes fall into a little bit of a finesse thing every once in a while, which I don't love. And Valanciunas, it's like, that's never going to happen with him. If he's out there on the court, he's just going to start laying bricks. And I love that for them. But
him and Bruce Brown bring that
Correct.
kind of physicality, energy to them, which I think I agree is needed.
Yep. Last thing in their little news segment here, three-way trade on whatever it was, Monday or Tuesday. It sends Norm Powell to the Heat, John Collins to the Clippers, Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love, and a second-round pick go to the Jazz. I want to quickly take this team by team, but just thoughts on the deal for the Heat from their perspective.
I love it for the Heat. They got an upgrade for free, essentially. Like Kevin Love obviously wasn't really going to play. Kyle Anderson didn't do that much once he came there from Minnesota, right? That's where he was. Or no, Golden State. He was in Golden State. He was in Minnesota before that. He signed with Golden State. He's in the Jimmy Butler trade. I love it for them. Granted, it's going to be quite an adventure if like he and Tyler Hero play at the same time, specifically on defense. Spo might get pretty frustrated with that, but I think he replaces a lot of what Duncan Robinson brought in terms of the movement shooting and the dribble handoff stuff, but can get downhill off the dribble more often. And it's basically a free flyer. I don't know if I love the idea of them extending him just because what you're going to have to pay him coming off the best season of his career is probably a contract where he has to keep getting better to outperform it. It's probably not going to be a team-friendly deal unless it's a similar structure to the one that Robinson got in Detroit, where it's, partial guarantee in the second year and non-guarantee on the third year. Or, Dorian Finney-Smith got something similar. Luke Cornett got something similar. If it was that kind of thing, then I could see it being beneficial from the Heat's perspective because then they could, keep the salary slot to use trades and whatnot. But I think even if you just keep him for this year and let him walk at the end of the season if it doesn't work out, like you got him for free and it'll make your team better this year.
Yeah. You basically traded out two guys who are going to be either on the edge of your rotation or out of the rotation for a guy who could legitimately start for you and probably does start for you. And that's a win, no matter any way you slice it, especially when you're not giving up any of that future flexibility. No draft picks. Like there's a second round pick in here that wasn't from Miami. Like
it's the Clippers 2027 or 29.
Right.
Can't remember.
It came in like Utah. It came over from Utah. It's very strange. But with Powell, the cool thing about he's extension eligible, I believe this until basically the end of the season. So Miami could just play it out and say, okay, like if he's awesome for us, we'll sign him to that extension. We can negotiate some of the terms like you were talking about. And if not, if we don't feel compelled to offer him the extension, then we let him walk. And the cool thing about Powell and even John Collins is there's like this magic thing that happens in the NBA where a player thinks that they deserve an extension and then they get traded and they go to a new organization where they're not as familiar with them. And you don't have that same kind of leverage, right? Norm Powell had reportedly wanted that extension after a career year with the Clippers last year. He was kind of looking at the front office like, okay, I did all this. Are you going to pay me? that doesn't work when you get traded to a new organization, because you have for the whole what have you done for me lately? You haven't done anything. You just got here. And so, that I think that was part of the strategy here for the Clippers was, Norm Powell expiring contract, John Collins expiring contract, but we're not kind of facing the same pressure when we bring Collins in. But I think Collins is a good fit for the Clippers too. I think that makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the contract situations. I also think clearly Powell wants an extension and probably wants several years on that extension. On our podcast, Mo has been talking about this a bunch, where the Clippers just are not signing contracts beyond the 2027 season. They're clearly gearing up to do something after that season when Kawhi's contract ends and when James Harden's. And we just found out that second year of his contract is either only partially guaranteed or non-guaranteed. But both of those guys are presumably going to be off the roster by that 2027 season, given what we know about them and their careers and their situations at this point. So they're gearing up for something. They clearly didn't want to pay Powell beyond that. And, it makes sense for him to be asking for an extension. He's coming off the best season of his career. He's 32 years old. The next contract might be his last contract. He wants it now, coming off the best season of his career. Maybe gets one in Miami, maybe doesn't. I agree. I like the Collins fit for the Clippers. I think it gives them a lot more front court versatility. They can now play him with either Brook Lopez or Ivica Zubac or Nick Batum. They can play him as the lone big man. Clearly, he's got experience doing both of those things. The issue is, for now at least, it leaves them extremely thin in the backcourt and on the perimeter, where they were already so dependent on James Harden to create absolutely everything for them offensively. They are supposedly the leaders in the clubhouse for Bradley Beal. And as long as they do that, then the issue is not solved, but at least somewhat alleviated by his presence, because you can't count on either him or Kawhi to be on the court all that often. But at least when they're there, you desperately need those guys to be able to help you with the creation.
Yeah, it feels like this cleared the way for Beal just to sign with the Clippers, and all the reporting around that situation feels like, everybody expects Beal to end up with the Clippers, which I like that. Beal at $50 million is very different than Beal at $4, $5, $6 million, whatever they're going to be able to offer him. And 2 years ago, when he wasn't being the Suns weren't making him miserable, he averaged 18 points per game, shot 40-something% from three. That stuff is useful. Averaged 5 assists that as a bit player, that works. Briefly on the Jazz, they're starting to piss me off a little bit. I understand what they're doing, but this this blatant tanking and just buying guys out and giving away veterans for nothing. First of all, it's a bad way to do it, right? They could have traded these guys ostensibly a year earlier for something better. Instead, they have to literally buy Jordan Clarkson out. They trade John Collins for nothing. They're going to probably buy out Kevin Love here. We'll see what happens with him, but yeah, this is the most unserious basketball team. And I know Jazz fans will tell you, we have to do it. We're small market, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure. You also didn't have to trade Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell when you did. I don't know. It's just, they're whatever, man. They're starting to piss me off a little bit. I'm very close to just boycotting Jazz games.
Yeah, they are going to be like the 21-22 Rockets and the 22-23 and 20 or sorry, yeah, the 21-22 Rockets, the 23-24 Wizards, where it's like an affront to basketball that you have to watch them. It's not going to be fun. I can't imagine myself watching more than a handful of Jazz games throughout the season. And last year was bad enough.
Yeah.
Now it's nobody in the room is playing professional basketball there. I similarly can't imagine that Kevin Love remains on that team. I feel like the most likely result is he gets bought out and goes and plays with the Lakers, with LeBron and those guys, plays with the Lakers.
Right.
I feel like that's the most likely thing. Maybe he retires. I don't know. Because if he gets bought out, then he gets the money that he was owed this year. But he seems like
he told me in Miami he wants to play until he's 40. So if he could just get to that 4-0 mark while just, to your point, quote unquote, playing for the Lakers, hanging out with LeBron, making a couple mil, I think that's what he would do if he can do it.
But the Jazz, like you said, as soon as they made the Gobert and Mitchell trades, it was like, all right, these guys are going to be set up. They got all these draft picks. They got all these guys now that you can maintain a semblance of professional basketball, and you can get more assets for them over the next several years. And it just seems like Danny Ainge and later Justin Zanuck and Austin Ainge set the price on these guys too high and never were able to get what they wanted, and now liquidated for basically nothing. Like Clarkson and Sexton and Collins were all these guys that we were talking about as trade deadline targets for the last 2 years. And then it was just like, oh, well, we didn't get the kind of deal that we wanted for them, so we held on to them. Now Clarkson gets you nothing. Sexton, you trade him with a second-round pick for Yusuf Nurkic.
It's crazy.
And Collins gets you a 2029 second-round pick. So you basically got Yusuf Nurkic, Kyle Anderson, and Kevin Love, who you're probably going to buy out for those three guys who could have netted you, multiple draft picks over the last several years at basically any time. And, I was listening to Zach Lowe and Howard Beck on Zach podcast the other day, and they were talking about how, Markkanen probably has to play himself back into the type of trade value that he might have had a year ago or last offseason. It's entirely possible that they missed the window on him too, and they're not going to get that much for him. Like, it's crazy the mismanagement that they've done since it seemed like they were set up so well after those trades.
Yeah, it's like they looked at what Masai Ujiri's done the last few years in Toronto and were like, hold my beer. like just a 101, a masterclass of mismanaging your assets and waiting too long to make trades. That's the team where it's just like, you know what? I'm not even going to pretend to watch them. I'll just log on to Synergy or NBA.com and just watch highlights of the guys I care about and just make it happen. But Markkanen, he's going to be the trade deadline guy, right? Like, he's going to be the guy in February where it's like, all right, I can't imagine. I know that he signed the big contract and everything like that. I can't imagine he was thinking this was going to be the team where they're literally just paying the good teammates to go away. It doesn't make, even you can even argue that they paid John Collins to go away because they flipped him for Kevin Love, who they're going to have to buy out and pay Kevin Love for the buyout. So it's crazy. All right,
Love's on a minimum though, right? So they're not really like paying him to go. They're paying him to turn him into Kyle Anderson, who they're presumably trade for nothing, I guess.
Right, that they'll attach a second round pick to Kyle Anderson later to get rid of him too. All right, I want to do a little segment here. It's called "Who Has Had the Worst Offseason?" I'm gonna pin. We've got 4 teams here. I'm gonna pin 2 Western Conference teams against each other. I'm gonna pin 2 Eastern Conference teams against each other. First one, starting the Western Conference: Sacramento versus Golden State. Worst offseason, and these words are doing a lot of work here so far.
Yeah, I mean, the Warriors have basically done nothing so far, right? So they're still trying to sort out the Jonathan Kuminga restricted free agency mess. So I would say their offseason can't be worse than anyone else's because they haven't actually done anything. And I don't particularly like what Sacramento has done. So I guess I'll say Sacramento's is worse. Like, they traded Valanciunas for Dario Saric to free up the space to bring in Dennis Schroeder, who I know they needed a point guard, but I don't particularly love the fit. Like, I'm not sure how Dennis Schroeder, Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, and Domantas Sabonis are supposed to play on the same team.
Right. The chance to, like you said, they needed a point guard. I think they still need a point guard, right? Like, I like Dennis Schroeder, but we've seen this movie before. We've seen what it looks like when you put Dennis Schroeder in, when you hand him the keys and say, hey, you're in charge of the truck now. That's not exactly what you want Schroeder doing. You kind of want him as a bit player who comes off the bench, plays really hard, can kind of play a little bit off the ball, play a little bit on the ball. And they're just going to throw the keys to this guy. To me, I'm going to vote Sacramento also because I feel like what they did is worse than doing nothing. And that's what Golden State has done so far. And it sounds like Golden State might still be the leader in the clubhouse for Al Horford. If they get him, you're going to look at their offseason a little bit differently. The Kuminga thing is a mystery to me. Talk about mismanagement, but this has been mismanagement from like both sides. It's been mismanagement from the Warriors side. It was mismanagement from Kuminga's side. Kuminga is telling every reporter who's going to listen, and his representation is telling everybody who's going to listen, hey, like the Heat are really interested, the Wizards are interested, the Kings are interested, and all these things. And it just feels like those teams are not actually all that interested because they know for a restricted free agent, there's no marketplace for them. So they're not going to give up. They're not going to give up any leverage in these negotiations. So I don't know what happens with Kuminga. It feels like the worst thing that could happen, just from like an everybody being happy standpoint, would be him returning to Golden State. But that ultimately might be what I don't know. I have no idea what happens. Do you have any sense of what happens there?
No sense of what happens. I will say I just wrote earlier today about how I kind of like what the Wizards and the Hornets have been doing for the last year and a half. If the Wizards trade a bunch of stuff for Jonathan Kuminga and give him a massive deal, and I like Kaminga. I've been like a relative believer relative to a bunch of other people out there. If you like give up like a first round pick and a bunch of other assets to give him a massive contract, when you just have all of these other guys on your roster that are 20, 21 years old, I'm not particularly in love with that.
Right.
Where the suitors are, I really have no idea. It does feel like the worst result for all involved is him coming back. I would say specifically the worst result for all involved is him coming back on the qualifying offer, which sort of makes him not really able to be included in the kind of trades that you'd want to use him in. Like, it's more desirable to sign him to like a Jalen Green style deal so that you can use him in a trade either this season or at the end of the season, even if that is kind of uncomfortable to actually pay him that amount of money or to have him back on the team considering the relationships there.
Last worst offseason so far matchup, Chicago versus Toronto.
I honestly can't even remember off the top of my head what Chicago has done.
So they have yet to pay Josh Giddey, still a restricted free agent. They traded Lonzo Ball for Isaac Okoro, and that's pretty much the extent of their offseason. Toronto.
And they re-signed Trey Jones.
And yes. And then Toronto did not include Jakob Poeltl in a Kevin Durant trade because they just had to sign him to another extension.
The Raptors did also bring in Mamu Kelishvili, who I kind of like as like an interesting backup big man flyer. I'll say the Bulls are worse. Granted, I do like not just throwing the bag at Josh Giddey. I think they're playing that situation right. The Lonzo for Isaac Okoro trade, it just makes no sense on any level. Like, you have Patrick Williams already to like kind of be able to shoot threes, but nobody cares if he does, and play defense, but you can't really keep him on the court for all that long because of all the other ways that he undermines you on the court. And now you're just going to have two of those guys. Bring him back Trey Jones, sure, and the deal is perfectly fine. But the Lonzo Okoro trade, I think it's just emblematic of the mismanagement of assets over the last several years. Like, they reportedly could have gotten a first-round pick for him at a bunch of different points over the last several seasons. And to turn that instead into Isaac Okoro, like, I don't get it. And then to extend both Arturas Karnisovas and Billy Donovan and keep shooting for like the 9th seed every year, I don't get it. Toronto, I guess, like, they also lost Masai Ujiri. Granted, Masai over the last several years, not necessarily the type of Masai that we saw in Denver and for the first however long he was in Toronto. I don't love the Jakob Poeltl extension because I don't love paying like solid starting center over the long term, even though they have kind of fallen apart whenever he hasn't been on the court over the last several years because they've had basically nothing else. He does have good pick and roll chemistry with Emmanuel Quickly whenever those guys are actually on the court together. He is a good player, but I don't love giving out that kind of deal. But just for all of the vibes, I guess, in Chicago, I'm going to say the Bulls.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I just don't know where Toronto is going or what they're doing. And that said, I also don't know where Chicago is going or what they're doing.
I would say I do know where Chicago is going and what they're doing, and I don't like
that.
Whereas Toronto, I don't really know where they're going and what they're doing. They trade OG and Pascal to complete sort of the teardown of that previous team, but they're not really younger and they're not less expensive, and they didn't get a ton of draft capital. Like, they got the 2 draft picks in the deal from the Pacers, and they got the first pick of the second round in the deal from the Knicks. But it's not like they got like massive hauls in either of those deals, and they're crazy expensive. Quickly's on a big deal. Barnes is on a big deal. RJ Barrett's on a big deal. Poeltl's on a big deal. They traded for and paid Brandon Ingram after giving up Bruce Brown, who they got in the Siakam deal. Like, I really don't know what that team is, whereas I do know what the Bulls are, and I don't like it at all.
So I'm going to give the edge to Toronto here because they did fire Masai Ujiri. And that guy ate off of that 2019 championship for probably too long, where he kind of rebuilt the team after that. Took too long to trade those other players like we were talking about. And then they became this weird team that could defend a bunch of positions, a bunch of long guys who could defend, but they couldn't really score. And then So they like very one-way team in that way, and then they switched those guys out for a bunch of guys who could score but can't play defense. So they're equally one way, but just the other way now. So I'm going to give the edge to Toronto because they actually fired their GM, who was kind of piloting them in this direction. So good for them. Maybe this
Yeah,
puts them in a better
it's
direction.
it's kind of a similar team to the previous one too, though, because yeah, they can score, but none of them is that great an individual creator for either themselves or others.
Right.
They're all just like
Put shots up.
yeah, like B- to B+
Yeah.
in terms of those skills. And like they did defend well over the second half of last season. I know that there's been like they were a top 10 defense from February on or whatever it was. But I'm not all that enthused and I'm not all that sure what's going on there.
All right. So it is the 15-year anniversary of the decision. You wrote about it for CBS Sports. You came up with 15 ways the decision changed the NBA. And I got to tell you, Jared, like all these websites now, they have that little timer at the top that tells you how long it's going to take you to read it. And when I saw 30 minutes, I was like, "Oh my God, what did he do? How long were you working on this for?" How many words did that come out to?
It's like around 5,000 words, I think.
Right.
I went pretty long on it. When they asked me to do the story, I was like, all right, yeah, I think I can do that. I think I can come up with 15. And I wound up coming up with like 25, and I had to cut them all down or combine them into one thing. Just it really did change the shape of the league forever, obviously. And there are so many different ramifications that you feel both on the court, like especially on the court, but also off the court in so many different ways. And not just in terms of what happened the next few years that he was in Miami, but so many years since then. Everything from the CBA to the type of basketball that gets played now and player empowerment and all these different things that I wrote about. And it was really fun to look back and to look over the last 15 years and everything that's happened since then and just be like, I'm going to look at I literally looked at like the standings and be like, how is this team touched by it? How is this team touched by it? How is this just to come up with all of the different ramifications around the league and for specific teams. It was really fun to work on and to write. And I'm sorry for anybody that takes the 30 minutes to read it. I did see that on the website too. And it's daunting, but I would really appreciate it if people did read it. I put a lot of time and effort into it. And I think it is sort of an important snapshot or timeline of everything that we've seen go on in the 15 years. I still can't believe it's been 15 years since that happened.
A little depressing. Yes. I will tell you, when I see that little timer and it's like a big number, like 30, I do race to the timer. like I'm racing Waze while driving. And I beat it. I think I came in at like 25 minutes, which was pretty good.
I'm a very fast reader, so it takes me like considerably less time, but I also wrote it. So like when I read it, there's like, I know what each sentence says already. So it's, it'll take me like 20 minutes probably to read it.
Classic speed reading strategy. No, definitely go read it. There's 100 things that I could ask you about from that piece because it was really interesting to go through it. You did a really good job of kind of finding those tentacles and those branches and things like, oh yeah, I guess it really did sort of influence this X, Y, and Z. We don't have enough time here to do the whole thing, but that's why you wrote it and that's why it exists on cbssports.com. So I do encourage everybody listening to go ahead and check that out because it's worth it. But I did want to highlight a couple of things and ask you about it. And you mentioned the player empowerment part of it. And that's sort of the most obvious thing. Like when you think about the decision, it is one of those landmark moments in NBA history where there's a before and an after, right? There's before the decision, there's after the decision. After the decision, you can kind of look at the decision as the birth of the player empowerment era. And you wrote about that part and you mentioned how basically once LeBron did the decision, a lot of players tried to do their own version of the decision and kind of followed suit over the next few years. You mentioned how Kevin Durant in his free agency did a similar thing, taking meetings and things like that. And then he had his own weird version of an announcement with the sleeveless Sports Illustrated cut thing. And then in 2019, didn't he announce it on like Boardroom TV on Instagram Live or something, like some weird, like they all try to do their version of it. We saw Gordon Hayward take meetings during a 4th of July weekend a couple of years or a few years after the 2017, I think that was. We saw Kyrie Irving leave the Cavaliers in 2017, kind of doing a similar like, oh, I want my own team player empowerment thing. But you also mentioned, I thought this was very astute, how it wasn't just that part. It wasn't just like the big storyline narrative, let me control it here. It's just the fact that we have a trade demands, a list of preferred destinations. When like, do we think that players are weighing in on roster decisions, coaching decisions, getting coaches fired, getting like star players getting teams to hire their support staff, training staff, coaches, assistant coaches, all these things. And I thought it was really interesting to kind of see how many ways that players wield the player empowerment stuff now. My question to you, though, is do you think that this has been good for the league now that we've kind of seen this over the last 15 years?
That's a good question. In terms of driving interest in the league, absolutely. Like the league makes a killing off of the transactional stuff, and another thing that I wrote about was like the scoops era of transactional reporting. Like that has been, I would say it's been beneficial for the league attention wise. It has not been beneficial for the league in terms of bringing attention to the on-court product. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword there. In terms of like the other ways that players wield their power, like I'd rather the players have the power than the owners. That makes much more sense to me. I do think that a lot of players have not been particularly good at wielding their power when they want certain roster decisions or certain coaches hired or fired or, to go to certain destinations. I think that a lot of them, there's a reason they're players and not executives. Some of them might make good executives after their careers are over, but being a player and an executive at the same time is extremely difficult. And you wind up just wanting to play with your friends. And when your friends are Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in the prime of their careers, that's great. When your friends are not those guys, then it doesn't work great.
Yeah, when you're trying to trade for Russell Westbrook, it's a little bit different. I don't know that the player empowerment thing was good. It felt like, and this has nothing to do with the money or whatever, but like to your point, like the players who tried to do it were really bad at it. Mm-hmm. And like the whole big three model that you also wrote about in this piece, that also kind of came out of this where guys like Kevin Durant looked around and like, well, LeBron could do it in Miami. I can do it in Brooklyn or Phoenix or, Kyrie Irving trying to do it. Well, and I think that the missing element, there's a couple missing elements, but the missing element that all these other big threes tried to do, whether it was in LA, Oklahoma City, Brooklyn, Phoenix, the Lakers tried to do it with Kobe and Steve Nash and Dwight Howard and all these things. The missing element was that the big three guys are in the primes of their career, and one of them is literally the best player on the planet. That helps. But the other part of it too was that it wasn't just those three guys going into a blank slate organization and trying to import something. Like LeBron and Chris Bosh joined Dwayne Wade in Miami, where he had won a championship 4 years prior. There was experience. There was, the Pat Riley, the Heat culture stuff, all this stuff. Eric Spoelstra, who was on staff during the finals run in 2006, was now the head coach in 2010. Like that it doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but I think that was a really big deal in terms of LeBron and Chris Bosh coming into something and learning from that versus Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving just trying to import all of that, for instance, into Brooklyn just because Kyrie had won a championship somewhere else and Harden had won MVPs and Durant had won championships in Golden State. It's just harder for all those things to mesh and to import it versus, everybody to kind of coalesce into something that already exists. I don't know if I'm explaining myself right, but that to me was like kind of one of the big takeaways from the failure of the big three era.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Although like LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love basically imported like the culture is LeBron to the Cavs, and they went to 4 straight finals and won.
That was the other big missing element in the other big threes, just not having LeBron.
Yeah,
that's part of it. Yeah,
Durant's move to Golden State was pretty wildly successful. Mm-hmm. And I should note, because you did bring up Durant's free agency earlier, that the one I was referring to was the 2016 free agency, not the 2010 extension where he just sort of announced on Twitter, I'm signing an extension at basically like a couple days before LeBron did his decision.
And he was the anti-LeBron for a long time.
Yeah, and everybody was like, oh, this is what you should do, Kevin Durant. 6 years later, he's doing basically exactly the same thing taking meetings in the Hamptons and deciding he's going to
Right.
go play with the
I just
Warriors.
want to know how much money did that tweet raise for the Boys and Girls Club, Kevin Durant? That's all I want to know.
Yeah.
Um, uh, what was the other thing that I wanted to ask you about from the Big Three piece? Or not the Big Three piece, the decision piece. Oh, the basketball part of it. You mentioned how it ushered in like the pace and space era, and you're totally right. And we're still maybe more than anything, that's the part of it that we're still living in 15 years later. We've just seen evolutions of it, but it's very much the same thing. And I remember talking to Steve Kerr when I was covering the Warriors, and he used to talk about how like there would be no death lineup with Draymond at the 5, if not for Chris Bosh, the way that Spoelstra used Chris Bosh at the 5 during those peak years of the Big Three era in Miami. And I thought it was a really good point that you made.
Yeah, when Bosh retired, I wrote about literally the exact thing and about how he changed the NBA by being the small ball center that was like blitzing and trapping and switching all over the place and stretching the floor on the other end because he turned himself into a three-point shooter during the time that he was in Miami. Like he is one of the crucial figures in like the history of the NBA because of his role on that team. And I do want to give credit to Tom Haberstroh, who wrote the story in ESPN that basically introduced the term pace and space to the NBA lexicon because Spoelstra went to Oregon to watch Chip Kelly's Oregon Ducks football teams and learn from him. And it was Kelly who sort of introduced the idea that they should be using those things to their advantage. And that was after the 2011 season when they had lost to the Mavs in the finals. And what they did over the next 2 years, the way they ran roughshod over the league with that system, it changed basically everything. And like you said, like that's the one we're still living with more than anything. Like that and player empowerment are the ones we're living with more than anything else. That was just like the permanent changes that like the league will never be the same.
Yep. Fascinating to kind of look back on it, but LeBron now still dealing with some decisions, right? We're almost done with the show here. I did want to ask you though about what LeBron does now because it's been a week and a half since Rich Paul issued that statement talking about, how it's been real Lakers, but we're probably just talk about the Lakers tenure for LeBron in the past tense and just a very weird statement overall that it felt like when it came out, people didn't quite know what to make of it. It's like, okay, is this a trade request? Is he just trying to apply pressure to the Lakers? Is he just sort of venting here? But it's been a few days, obviously, now since that thing was released. What do you think about the statement now, after you've had a few days to think about it a little bit more? And what do you think it means for LeBron's future?
I still think it means that he's trying to put pressure on them to make some more like win now style moves. I think that there's been a discussion about how like, LeBron is win now and Luka's about the future. Like Luka's 26 years old. He went to his Mavs teams went to the finals. And, I remember Zach Lowe and Howard Beck were talking about this on Zach's podcast. And he was like, Luka's win now also. And I was like, yeah, I've been saying this in my head for like a week. I don't understand why people are making this distinction between LeBron and Luka. It doesn't make that sense. Like, yeah, Luka's going to be there presumably for, the next half decade plus. So, there is more long-term thinking there, but he's ready to win right the hell now. And so is LeBron. And I think the idea of the statement, like Mo and I talked about this as well. If all he wanted was to leave the Lakers, he could have opted out and gone and signed anywhere that he wanted. But he was never going to do that because he wouldn't be getting $50+ million a year because the only team that had cap space was the Nets. And if you want to do a sign and trade for a $50-something million player, there are way too many restrictions on what you could do. How are you sign and trading for like a $50-something million player and staying under the first apron, which you have to do if you take a player back in a sign and trade? It just doesn't make any sense. The idea that LeBron is going to get bought out just does not square to me with the conception he has of himself as a player and his stature in the league, both now and in the history of the league. I cannot possibly see that ever happening. Maybe I'll be wrong. It's happened once or twice before that I've been wrong. So, maybe that's one of those cases. But to me, it's just like, all right, come on. This might be my last season. It's one of my last 2 or 3 seasons, or who the hell knows. But to me, it's more like, all right, let's get a move on here. Let's try to bring in some more guys. Like maybe let's not let Dorian Finney-Smith leave for a contract
Right.
that is not really all that expensive with the Rockets because it's partially guaranteed in year 3 and non-guaranteed in year 4. Let's maybe go after, a center who's not DeAndre Ayton and get us some more help here.
Yeah, it felt like when they chose Jake LaRavia over Dorian Finney-Smith and DeAndre Ayton over perhaps Brook Lopez, who a lot of people thought was going to go to the Lakers before he ended up signing with the Clippers. They kind of chose Luka Doncic's timeline over LeBron's timeline. But, you can also defend those things. Like, hey, we think Ayton's just going to be better these next couple of years than Brook Lopez because he's younger and we just think we like his skill set a little bit more. Whatever. They could be right. They could be wrong, but you can at least defend it. The Dorian Finney-Smith thing was very strange, but I think both things could be true because some people are trying, okay, is this just them trying to apply pressure on their organization or is this a trade request? Yes, I think it's both. I think it's do it or else kind of statement. It's, hey, can you make an effort to show me that you care about winning the championship this season? Can you just make a move that shows me that you're willing to do that? And if you do that, everything's hunky-dory, we're ready to go. But if you don't, come October, training camp time-ish, whatever, September, October, maybe I do start subtly asking for you guys to explore trading me. I think maybe that could be true too. One other conspiracy theory that I had, not to make this the whole conspiracy podcast, but LeBron has talked a lot about how he sort of idolizes Tom Brady's career. And one of the things that Brady did, obviously, at the end of his career was he leaves the Patriots, and I know I'm talking to the right guy here because you know the NFL, but leaves the Patriots to join the Buccaneers because the Patriots were going younger. They weren't surrounding Tom Brady with age-appropriate talent, and they just had to make a decision, and they had to make a decision to go younger and kind of start a new era. And I wonder if this is LeBron starting to spin the narrative that is similar, where it's like, look, I wanted to stay with the Lakers. I don't want to be the guy who demands a trade because we also know LeBron takes a lot of pride in never being a guy who has ever demanded a trade. He's always made his decision as a free agent, which, again, he could have done that this summer if he wanted to. But is this him beginning the narrative of, hey, it wasn't me, it was you. You decided that you wanted to go younger. You decided that you no longer wanted to be on my timeline. I'm still an elite player at 40 years old, capable of winning a championship. I guess I just got to do it somewhere else. It was out of my control. And whatever comes next is going to be his Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, where he just walks in, turnkey championship contender, and has a chance to maybe win one last ring. Conspiracy theory, totally just something I thought about.
I like it. I think it's a good theory. I think it's as good a theory as anything else that I've heard. Yeah, I'm into it.
I like it. Do you have when you're thinking about like a LeBron team? Because you're right about you can't sign and trade him. Obviously now you don't have to sign and trade him, but like in one sense, like him opting in does make it a little bit easier for him to get to where he wants to go. Because if it was a sign and trade, you deal with the hard cap and all that stuff. If you were to opt out, there's not a lot of teams with cap space. Is LeBron really going to play for the minimum? I would have a hard time believing that. Like, you think about the Cavs, that would be the obvious place. The Knicks could probably do it.
The Cavs can't happen. They're so far over the second apron. They can't aggregate salaries, and they can't match his salary in a trade. So I don't know why people are talking about that one still.
That's a great point. And it would be very hard for them to get under the second apron at this point. It would just, and they're not going to jump through those kinds of hoops to bring LeBron back.
I think they're like $20 million over, if I'm remembering correctly. Like, I just don't see how that one works.
Yeah, they would have to trade Jared Allen into cap space that nobody has, for instance, and then trade like Darius Garland, plus like DeAndre Hunter and a bunch of other stuff for LeBron, which, again, I don't think they probably are looking at the East and like, we don't have to do all of this. We could still win the Eastern Conference with the team.
Yeah, they're $23 million over the second apron. So unless he's getting bought out, which again, I can't see that happening, there's just no functional way for that to work.
So then what's the spot that you're looking at then, if there is anything?
I mean, I'm still on he's just putting pressure on it and it's not really going to happen with a trade. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much sense it makes anymore because they signed Ayton. But the one that made the next most sense to me was the Knicks for Karl Anthony Towns, especially after they hired Mike Brown, where your ears sort of perk up at that.
Yep.
because obviously LeBron was coached by him for his tenure for I think all but his first season in the first run at Cleveland. Because Paul Silas was the coach during his rookie year, if I'm remembering correctly. That's going all the way back 22 years ago now, so I could be misremembering that, but I'm pretty sure that was the order of operations there. But I don't know how well that works either anymore.
Yeah, it's tough. The Warriors are in a similar situation with their cap space. They're not above the second apron. Where are they, actually? If he were to try to join Steph in Golden State, could they do it for just Jimmy Butler straight up? Does that make sense? I don't know. There's weird math things. I don't know. This is when we're starting to get into salary cap and looking stuff up. That's not great radio, but I'll leave it there. Jared Dubin, you can find him, the Double Dribble podcast with Mo Dakhil, two of our favorites here on Real GM Radio. Find his work over on the Last Night in Basketball newsletter. You could find that just by Googling it. We'll also include the link in the show notes. And then, again, check out that piece that he wrote over at CBS Sports, 15-year anniversary of the decision. Jared, always a pleasure, my man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And just I am doing a 25% off at Last Night in Basketball through the remainder of free agency. If you click on any of the posts near the top of the page right now, you'll find that discount link in there.
Perfect. And I would highly recommend signing up. Also, did not call this out yet, but the Miami Hurricanes hat, is that all Miami podcast that we're doing here? Was that on purpose or?
No, it's I forgot to I didn't have time to shave my head today, so I had to throw a hat on, and this is my black hat, and I'm wearing a black shirt. So
that's fashion forward. There you go. Fashion tips, basketball. We got it all here at Real GM Radio.
And Go Canes, obviously.
Go Canes.